This is part 28 of ASP .NET Web API tutorial. In this video, we'll discuss the benefits of social logins and using Google Authentication with ASP .NET Web API. So here is what we want to do. On our login page, we want to include this button, Login with Google. Once we click this button, the application redirects us to Google sign-in page where we provide our Google credentials, and once we are successfully authenticated by Google, it's going to redirect us back to our application where we can see the protected data. In our case, protected data is employees' data. Let's look at this in action. Notice on the login page, we've got this button, Login with Google. Once I click this button, notice we are redirected to the Google sign-in page. Now let's log in with our Google credentials. I'm going to use this username, webapi33@gmail.com. Let's provide our Google password. Once I click sign in, notice I am successfully authenticated by Google, and at this point Google is asking for my permission to allow the application to view the data that Google is holding about myself. So I allow the application. So at this point we are redirected back to our application and we are on data.html. And notice what the message says here, hello webapi33@gmail.com. So this is the username that I have used to authenticate myself with Google. And now when I click load employees, I can see the employees data. Once we click the log off button, we are logged out and back on the login page. And if you look at these two tables, ASP NET users and ASP NET user logins, notice in both of these tables we have got an entry for our Google login. Look at the email address. This is the same email address that we have used to authenticate ourselves with Google. And look at the password hash column. This is null, so we don't have to write any code to manage usernames and passwords and authenticate users. All this is done by external authentication provider. In this case, the external authentication provider is Google. So what are the benefits of using social logins like Google, Facebook, Twitter, Microsoft, etc.? For application users, registration is simple and easy. All they have to provide is their social login username and password, and the user is automatically registered with our application. This also means one less password for the user to remember. When users don't have to remember multiple usernames and passwords to log into multiple websites, there will be less failed logins. As you know, remembering multiple usernames and passwords is definitely a hassle. From the development point of view, we do not have to write code to manage usernames and passwords. All this is done by the external authentication providers like Google, Facebook, Twitter, Microsoft, etc. To use Google Authentication, first we have to register our application with Google. To register our application with Google, let's navigate to this URL, console.developers.google.com. Let's log in with our Google credentials. Once we are successfully logged in, we are going to create a new project. To create a new project, click on this drop down right here and then select this option, create project. I'm going to name our project Employee Web API Service. Let's click this create button. This is going to take a few seconds to complete the project creation. Notice it is still busy creating the project for us. Once the project is successfully created, click on this tab right here, Credentials, and then click on this option, OAuth Consent Screen, and then provide a product name which will be shown to the users. So let's specify the name as Employee Web API Service, and let's click the Save button. Now click this button which says create credentials. What we want to do here is create OAuth client ID. So let's select this option. Our application type is web application, so I'm going to select this radio button and I'm going to leave this default name web client 1, and then we need to specify the authorized JavaScript origin. The application is running at this URI localhost 34838. So basically the authorized origin is nothing but the origin where your application is running. So let's specify the URI right here. And then we also need to specify the authorized redirect URI. And the redirect URI is going to be localhost colon 34838 / signin - Google. So this is the URI to which the user will be redirected after he is successfully authenticated by Google. And notice here we get client ID and client secret. We need both of these to enable Google authentication for our ASP.NET Web API service. In just a bit, we'll see how we are going to use both of these. Let's click OK now. There is one more last thing that we need to do here. We need to enable Google Plus API service. To enable that, click on Library, and under Social APIs, click on this which says Google Plus API, and then we'll have to enable that service. So just click the Enable button, which is going to enable the Google Plus API service for us. So these are all the steps to register our application with Google. Now let's see what we need to do from the Web API service side to use Google authentication. First, we need to enable Google authentication. To enable Google authentication, open this file startup.auth.cs and scroll all the way down. Notice the code block that enables Google authentication is commented. So let's uncomment this, and we need to specify client ID and client secret. We got both of these after we have registered our application with Google. So let's go to Google Console and then click on this Credentials tab and then click this edit icon. Notice here we have client ID, so let's copy that and paste it right here. Similarly, let's copy the client secret and paste it right here. Next, we want login with Google button on our login page. So let's open login.html page, and just after this existing user login table, we want this social login table. So to speed things up, I'm going to copy this HTML, paste it right here, and then change the bits that are required. So the text is going to say social logins. We don't need any button or anchor elements, so let's remove them from there. We don't need this call span here, so let's get rid of that as well. And here we just need one tr. We don't need all these trs, so let's delete all of them. And within this tr, let's include a td, and then we need a button for Google login. So let's include an input element of type button. Let's give it an ID. Let's call this btn Google login. The value on the button is login with Google, and let's use the bootstrap button classes btn and btn success. Let's save our changes and reload our login page. Notice now we see login with Google button. Let's now wire up click event handler for our login with Google button. The ID is btn Google login, so let's use the ID, find the button, and then wire up the click event handler. So what is supposed to happen when we click this login with Google button? We want the user to be redirected to Google sign-in page. So window.location.href equals some redirection URI. So where are we going to get that URL from? To get that URL, we are going to issue a GET request to this URL right here, localhost colon port number 34838 /API /account /external logins, and then we have got a couple of query string parameters. I'll have this URL available in the description of this video. So issue a GET request to this URL, which is going to give us another URL, and we will specify that as the value right here. Before we issue a GET request, let's give our solution a build succeeded. Now let's go ahead and issue a GET request to this URL right here. So once we issue a GET request to this URL, look at what we are getting back. We are getting another URL right here. So this is the URL that we want to redirect the user to when we click that login with Google button. So I'm going to copy that URL and then specify that right here. Now, if you notice the URL right here, we have got a query string parameter which says redirect underscore URI. So basically this parameter specifies the URL that we want to redirect the user to after he is successfully authenticated by Google. So this URL is encoded here. That's the reason why we can't read it easily, but I'm going to copy it until here. So these last 5 numbers here, 34838, that is the port number at which our application is running. So I'm going to copy the redirect URI, which is URL encoded, and I'm going to decode that. Now to decode the URL, simply type in Google URL encode decode, and we have a website here, URL dash encode dash decode. So let's paste the encoded URL right here and let's decode that. So this is our redirection URI, http://localhost:348838. Now in our case, what we want to do is we actually want the user to be redirected to our login.html page after he is successfully authenticated by Google. So I'm going to specify this as the redirection URL. So let's copy that, paste it right here, and then let's encode the URL. So the encoded URL, let's take it, and then I am going to specify it as the value right here. So instead of redirecting it to the root application root, I'm actually going to redirect after the user is authenticated by Google to login.html page. Alright, so let's save our changes, and we also need to do one more change in application OAuth provider file. You can find this file in providers folder. So let's open the file, and we have to make a change in validate client redirect URI method. So again here the redirection URI is specified as the root of our application. Instead of that, I am actually going to redirect the user back onto our application login.html page. Let's give our solution a build, reload the login page, and let's log out of the Google account. And now let's click login with Google button. We expected it to redirect us to Google sign-in page, but we are getting invalid request error. This is because if you look at this redirect URI query string parameter, the value for this is this. Notice after login.html we have these encoded characters %2f. These encoded characters stand for a /. So let's copy the redirect URI value. Let's go to URL encode decode tool. Let's click this start over link, and let's paste our encoded URL right here, and let's click this decode URL. Notice at the end we have got a /. But if you look at this file right here, application OAuth provider validate client redirect URI, notice in the redirection URL right here at the end we don't have a /. So there are two ways to fix this error. One way is to include a / here. The other way is to remove the / from here. So to remove the /, let's remove the encoded characters. Let's save our changes, reload our login page, and now let's click login with Google button. Notice now we are redirected to the Google sign-in page. So let's provide our Google credentials now. Let's sign in. Now Google is asking for permission to allow the application to view our email address and basic profile info. Let's click this allow button. So we are giving our permission, and now we are redirected back to login.html page, and look at the URL. To the URL we have the access token appended. So we need to retrieve this access token from the URL and need to do a few things. First, let's write a JavaScript function that's going to retrieve the access token from the URL. we are going to keep all our Google authentication related JavaScript functions in a separate file. So let's right click on the scripts folder and let's add a new JavaScript file. Let's name this Google Authentication, and we are going to make use of jQuery. So let's drag and drop jQuery and let's write our function. Let's call this function get access token. So to retrieve the access token from the URL, let's use location.hash. So basically this is going to check if the URL has got a hash in it. Notice within our URL, after hash we have got the access token. So location.hash is going to return us the hash and whatever we have after the hash. Okay, so if location.hash is true, meaning if there is a hash in the URL, and if location.hash.split, and we are going to split using this string access token equals. So we want to split it using that. So again, if this is true, meaning if the hash fragment has got this access token equals, then we want to split it. So if it is true, then what do we want to do? Let's actually split it. So let's create a variable. Let's call it access token equals location.hash.split access token equals. So what is the split function going to do? It's going to return us a string array with two strings in it. The string at index position 0 is going to contain access token equals, and the string at index position 1 will contain the access token value. And in the URL, in addition to access token, we also have few other query string parameters. Notice here we have token type, expires in, and we also have state. Now we don't need all those query string parameters, so we want only the access token value. So we want to further split the string that we have at index position 1. So take the string at index position 1 and then call again the split function, and this time we want to split it using the ampersand character. So the access token value ends here and then we have an ampersand there, so we want to split it at that point. So let's split it using ampersand, and let's take the index string at index position 0. So this is going to give us the access token. So now we are going to do another check. If access token is true, if we have a value in this access token variable, then what we want to do is call another function, is user registered. We don't have this JavaScript function yet. We'll create that in just a bit. So basically this function is going to check whether if the user who is authenticated by Google is already registered with our application. So to check if a user is already registered with our application, let's issue a GET request to another URL using Fiddler. We have Fiddler fired up here. To check if the authenticated user is registered with our application, we're going to issue a GET request to /API/account/user info. We also need to send the access token to the server using authorization header. Since the access token is a bearer token, we also have to use this word bearer and then the access token value. We've got the access token in the URL, so let's copy it from the URL. So the access token value starts right here, and within the URL we have other query string parameters as well, token type, expires in, etc. We don't need all those query string parameters. We just need the access token value, which ends right here. So let's copy it and paste it right here. Let's execute this request. Notice the request completed successfully. And look at the response we got. We got a JSON object, and look at this property, has registered. This is set to false. So basically, the user who is authenticated by Google is not yet registered with our application. So the function that we are going to write now is going to issue a GET request to this URI and check if the user is registered with our application. If the user is already registered with our application, then it's going to store the access token and username in browser local storage and then redirect the user to protected areas within our application. In our case, he will be redirected to data.html. In case if he is not registered, this function is going to call another function which we are yet to implement, and that function will have the code to register the external user. So first, let's implement isUserRegistered function, which is going to check if the user is registered with our application. We are back in Google Authentication.js file. Let's implement isUserRegistered function. To this function, we are also passing the access token. So the first thing that we want to do here is issue an Ajax call. Let's specify the Ajax options. The first thing we want to specify is the URL. The URL to which we want to issue a request is right here, /API/account/userinfo. And to that URL, we want to issue a GET request. So method is GET. And we also need to specify headers. First, let's specify content type header. Content type is application/JSON, and let's also specify authorization header. The value for this is this word beta followed by a single space, and then to that we will append the access token which is coming into this function as a parameter. And when the request completes successfully, we want to handle the response that comes back from the server using this success function. So let's pass the response to the function. And the first thing that we want to do here is check has registered property. Notice once we issue a GET request to this URL, in the response that we got this has registered property, which tells us if the authenticated user is registered with our application or not. If the user is registered with our application, then we want to store the access token and username in local storage and then redirect the user to data.html page. So local storage.setItem, let's use the key as access token. So this is the same key that we're using on the login page, and we are getting the access token from the parameter. Similarly, within the local storage, let's store username as well. Let's use the key as the username. And where are we going to get the username from? We get the username from the response object using the email property. So let's use the response object email property. And then finally, we want to redirect the user to data.html page. So window.location.href equals data.html. So if the user is if the user is registered with our application, this is what we want to do. If the user is not registered with our application, then we want to register the user. So to register the user, we are going to call another JavaScript function. Let's call it sign-up-external-user, and to this let's pass the access token. We'll implement the sign-up-external-user function in just a bit. First, let's look at the URL that we need to issue a request to register the external user. Here is the URL /API/account/register-external. To this URL, we need to issue a POST request. First, let's make a copy of this function isUserRegistered and then change the bits that are required. First of all, the name of the function is sign-up-external-user, to which we are passing the access token, and then we want to issue a request to this URL. So let's copy that and specify it right here. And to this URL, we want to issue a POST request instead of a GET request. The headers are going to be the same, And when the request completes successfully, that is, when the user is registered successfully with our application, we want to redirect him to Google sign-in page. That is the same page to which we redirect the user when we click login with Google button that is present on our login.html page. So I'm going to copy this line of code right here and then paste it right here. So what is this sign up externally user function doing? This registers the user with our application and then redirects him to Google sign-in page. We also need to make a change in register external function. This function is present in account controller. So let's go to account controller, and here is the register external function. First of all, we don't need this parameter, register external binding model parameter. So let's get rid of that. We don't need this if block as well. So let's get rid of that as well. And to get the email property value, we are going to make use of this info object instead of the model object. We have already deleted the model object, so it's no longer available. But to get the email property value, let's use the info object, which also has the same email property. And let's go to login page, and let's reference this Google Authentication.js file on our login.html page. This script file is present in scripts folder. So let's drag and drop this just after the jQuery script file here. And then within our ready function, let's call getAccessToken function. Now let's look at the flow. Let's see what happens when we log in with our Google credentials. So on login.html page, we have this login with Google button. When we click the button, we send the user to Google sign-in page. So the user logs in with his Google credentials. Once that is successful, Google will redirect the user back to login.html page, that is the same page with access token appended to the URL. And on this page we are calling getAccessToken function. And what is this function doing? It retrieves the access token from the URL and then calls isUserRegistered function, passing it the access token. And what is this isUserRegistered function doing? It checks if that external user is registered locally with our application. If he is already registered with our application, then it's going to store access token and username in the browser local storage and redirect him to the data page where he can see employees data. In our case, the external user is not yet registered with our application. So in this case, it's going to call sign up external user function, passing it again the access token. And what is the sign up external user function doing? It registers that external user with our application by issuing a post request to this URL. And once the user is successfully registered, it redirects us back to the Google sign-in page. And this time, again, the access token method will be called getAccessToken. It retrieves the access token from the URL. And then this time, since the user is already registered with our application, it's going to store the access token username in browser local storage and then redirects the user to data.html page where he can see employees data. So with all these changes, let's give our application a build. Build succeeded. Now let's go back to login.html page. We are already logged in with this email address webapi33@gmail.com, and notice to the URL the access token is appended. So at this point, when we look at these two tables, ASP NET users, ASP NET user logins, we don't have webapi33 registered with our application yet, so these two tables are empty. So when we click login with Google button, look at what's going to happen. We are redirected to data.html, and look at the message, hello webapi33@gmail.com, and when I click load employees, we can see the employees data. And at this point, if we look at these two tables, notice there is an entry for webapi33@gmail.com in both of these tables. So this external user is now registered with our application. Now let's log out of Gmail, and let's also log out of our application. And at this point, when we click login with Google, it's going to redirect us to Google sign-in page. Let's log in with another email, good Venkat. Let's provide the password and sign in. Notice it's asking to allow the application to view our email address and basic profile information. Let's allow it. And now we are redirected back to data.html. It identifies that I am logged in with goodvenkat@gmail.com, and we can see the employees data as well. So at this point, if we look at these two tables, we have an entry for goodvenkat@gmail.com. We are back on the slides. Let's quickly recap the steps. To use Google Authentication, first we have to register our application with Google. To register the application with Google, go to console.developers.google.com. Step 2. In startup.auth.cs file that you can find in app_start folder, uncomment this block of code. Include client ID and client secret that you have got after registering your application with Google. This block of code enables Google Authentication for our ASP.NET Web API service. Step 3. In login.html page, include this HTML table which displays login with Google button. Step 4. Wire up click event handler for login with Google button. When we click login with Google button, we are redirecting the user to Google sign-in page. To get this redirection URL, issue a GET request to this URL right here. Step 5. Modify validate client redirect URI method to redirect the user to login.html page after the user is authenticated by Google. You can find this method in application authprovider.cs file in the providers folder. Notice here we have changed the redirection URL to /login.html instead of just the /. Step 6. Add a JavaScript file to the scripts folder, name it Google Authentication.js, and include these three JavaScript functions. Get access token, which retrieves the access token from the URL. Is user registered? This function checks if the user authenticated by Google is already registered locally with our application. Sign up external user. This function registers the external user with our application. And here we've got get access token function. Here is user registered function, and finally sign up external user function. Step 7. In account_controller.cs, modify register external method to remove the parameter register external binding model parameter, and we also removed the if model state.isValid code block from there, and then we are using info object instead of the model object to retrieve the external user email. And finally, on login.html page, reference Google Authentication.js file and call get access token function. So those are all the steps required to use Google Authentication with ASP.NET Web API. Thank you for listening and have a great day.